The story of the Merovingians begins not with kings, armies, or conquests, but with a shadowed origin, a lineage whose roots are entwined with myth, legend, and a subtle current of power that has whispered through history for centuries. Long before Clovis united the Frankish tribes, or the Merovingians carved their kingdoms from the chaos of early medieval Europe, there existed a figure whose name would become both a symbol and a mystery: Merovech. Some chroniclers describe him as part mortal, part divine, a man born a union between a noble woman and a creature of the sea, an almost ethereal being whose blood carried the echo of something beyond the ordinary human experience. Whether these accounts are to be taken literally, metaphorically, or as fragments of ritualized myth, they point to an understanding of lineage that transcends mere biology. The Merovingians were perceived as more than rulers. They were vessels of an inherited power, custodians of knowledge and influence that touched both the temporal and the mystical realms. In the early centuries of their emergence, Gaul was a fragmented land, a tapestry of warring tribes, fledgling settlements, and shifting allegiances. Amid this turbulence, the Merovingians rose, their authority both remarkable and enigmatic. Unlike other rulers whose power depended solely on force or strategic alliances, the Merovingians carried with them a perception of inevitability, a sense that their right to rule was sanctioned not merely by victory or inheritance, but by a hidden, almost sacred authority. The stories of their ancestors, Merovech, Clodio, and others, hint at a line steeped in symbols and rituals, a line whose very existence demanded respect, obedience, and reverence. This was a lineage that did not merely govern land. It commanded a kind of spiritual resonance, a subtle force that shaped perceptions and allegiances in ways beyond the reach of ordinary kings. Central to this perception was the figure of Clovis I, arguably the most famous Merovingian king, whose rise to power illustrates the complex interplay between divine symbolism, political strategy, and historical destiny. Clovis is remembered for uniting the Frankish tribes, consolidating power in a land rife with conflict, and establishing the foundations of a kingdom that would endure for centuries. Yet, even his baptism, a pivotal event often recounted as a simple act of Christian conversion, carries deeper significance. It was not merely a gesture of piety or political pragmatism. It was a symbolic assertion of legitimacy, an intertwining of sacred authority and temporal power. Through this ritual, Clovis' bloodline was sanctified in the eyes of both men and, perhaps more importantly, the unseen forces that his ancestors were believed to commune with. The act of entering the waters, accepting the sacred rites, and publicly aligning with the church marked a turning point. The visible merger of spiritual and worldly authority, a fusion that reinforced the dynasty's mysterious aura, while simultaneously positioning it within the emerging Christian order of Europe. Yet the power of the Merovingians was not confined to ceremonial acts or political feats. Their very appearance, their mannerisms, and most famously, their long hair, served as living symbols of continuity and sacred inheritance. Unlike other rulers, whose hairstyles, attire, or regalia might shift with fashion or circumstance, the Merovingians maintained a consistent, almost ritualized aesthetic. Their long hair was a visible marker of divine favor, a tangible connection to the mystical essence believed to flow through their veins. To cut it was to sever this sacred link, to diminish the authority encoded in their very being. This simple, yet profound, symbol communicated power without words, a silent assertion that the dynasty's legitimacy was inherent, inherited, and not solely dependent upon conquest or decree. In the courts of the Merovingians, power manifested as much in ritual and ceremony as in governance. Advisors, scribes, and courtiers were not merely bureaucrats. They were participants in a system of esoteric knowledge, interpreters of signs, and custodians of rituals whose meanings were layered and often deliberately obscured. The presence of the king was a central element in these ceremonial displays, but it was his aura, the weight of his bloodline, the symbolism of his hair, the subtle cues of posture and gesture that truly defined the court's hierarchy and authority. Every decision, every decree, every public appearance was embedded with multiple layers of meaning, some visible, some secret, and all contributing to the projection of a mystique that reinforced loyalty and commanded obedience. The mystique of the Merovingians was further amplified by legends of prophecy, foresight, and supernatural discernment. Chroniclers suggest that kings could perceive dangers before they arose, interpret omens in natural phenomena, and anticipate the movements of both allies and rivals with uncanny precision. Whether these accounts reflect literal truth, mythic embellishment, or a careful cultivation of image, they underscore the perception of the Merovingians as rulers operating at a level beyond ordinary human comprehension. Their authority was thus twofold: overt, exercised through armies and governance, and covert, exerted through the perception of an inherited, almost supernatural understanding of power, order, and destiny. Religious and cultural influences were inseparable from the Merovingians' political and mystical authority. The kings maintained close ties with emerging Christian institutions, yet their influence was never entirely subsumed by the church. On the contrary, it appears that the dynasty operated in a delicate balance, leveraging the legitimacy granted by religious rights while simultaneously preserving traditions, symbols, and rituals that may have predated Christianity. This duality, a public alignment with dominant religious structures paired with the secret preservation of older, mystical knowledge, allowed the Merovingians to maintain both temporal power and the aura of sacred authority. They were rulers who existed simultaneously within the world of men and in a shadowed sphere where blood, symbol, and ritual dictated the flow of influence. The dynasty's mysterious origins, their symbolic practices, and their esoteric knowledge extended beyond courtly life into the broader landscape. Towns, sacred sites, and even natural features were often associated with the Merovingians, intentionally or otherwise, leaving a subtle imprint of their influence. Churches, crypts, and monastic foundations bore symbols and markers that may have encoded knowledge or signaled allegiance to the sacred line. Even seemingly mundane aspects of geography and architecture were often carefully chosen, reflecting a consciousness that power was not merely exercised, but also encoded, transmitted, and preserved through physical spaces and symbolic acts. The perception of divine blood extended to the notion of lineage as a living force. Historians and esoteric scholars alike note that the Merovingians were believed to carry within them a type of hereditary wisdom, a continuity of insight that was as much spiritual as it was practical. This inheritance was not limited to political strategy or governance. It encompassed knowledge of symbolism, ritual, social influence, and the hidden mechanisms by which societies functioned. Such a conception of inherited authority distinguishes the Merovingians from contemporary rulers, suggesting a sophistication in understanding the interplay between power, perception, and continuity that resonates with ideas found in secret traditions and esoteric teachings throughout history. As we trace the story of the Merovingians from Merovec to Clovis and beyond, it becomes clear that their significance cannot be fully captured by chronicles of battle, succession, or conquest. Their dynasty is a testament to a complex vision of rulership in which blood, symbol, ritual, and esoteric knowledge converge. Their authority was legitimized not merely by victory or recognition, but by an intricate web of inherited power, sacred symbolism, and social perception carefully maintained over generations. Each king was both a ruler and a symbol, a living nexus of influence whose presence communicated authority as powerfully as any decree or army. The enduring fascination with the Merovingians lies in this interplay of history and mystery. They challenge conventional understanding of power, reminding us that influence is often exercised not through the visible alone, but through the subtle, hidden currents that shape societies over centuries. Their bloodline, rituals, and symbols offer a window into a world in which authority is simultaneously tangible and intangible, public and secret, temporal and eternal. The dynasties rise amidst chaos. Its careful cultivation of sacred authority and its persistent, albeit shadowed, influence offer insights not only into medieval history, but into the timeless dynamics of power, lineage, and secrecy. Even now, as we attempt to reconstruct the past, the Merovingians resist simple categorization. They are at once historical figures, mythic symbols, and custodians of a hidden legacy whose full scope remains elusive. In the long, flowing hair of a Merovingian king, in the cryptic inscriptions of a forgotten monastery, in the whispered legends preserved in obscure texts, we glimpse the contours of a power that was as subtle as it was profound. Their story teaches us to look beyond the surface of history, to recognize that influence is often hidden, and that the line between legend and reality may be far more permeable than we dare to imagine. In the quiet, shadowed corners of European history, beyond the bustling courts and the chronicles of kings and conquests, there exists a thread so delicate, so hidden, that it almost escapes the notice of historians and storytellers alike. It is the line of the Merovingians, a dynasty whose power was not merely measured in lands or armies, but in something far subtler, something that touched both the spiritual and the temporal. They were rulers of flesh and blood, yet legend suggests they were marked by something more, an inheritance whispered to be sacred, a lineage thought to carry secrets of authority, wisdom, and a hidden influence that may have shaped the course of history itself. To the casual observer, they were simply medieval kings, adorned with long hair and seated upon thrones in Gaul, ruling over lands fragmented by war and political intrigue. But beneath the surface, beneath the visible and recorded history, ran a current of mystery, a quiet power that some say flowed through their veins like a living, guiding force. The origins of the Merovingians are lost in a fog of myth and fragmentary records, stretching back to a time when Europe was a patchwork of tribes, kingdoms, and shifting alliances. They emerged as formidable rulers, yet their rise was unlike that of ordinary monarchs. Chronicles describe them as possessing an almost magnetic presence, a charisma that drew loyalty and inspired awe, as if their authority was not granted by conquest alone, but by some hidden, perhaps divine, right. Legends insist that their long hair, which they never cut, was not merely a fashion or tradition, but a sacred symbol, a visible emblem of the continuity of their bloodline. In every strand, the story goes, was embedded a connection to forces beyond the mundane world, a living link to destiny itself. Yet the fascination with the Merovingians extends far beyond symbols and rituals. Their courts were centers of intrigue, where decisions seemed influenced by forces unseen, and their actions often reflected knowledge or foresight that ordinary rulers could not possess. Chroniclers hinted at their capacity for prescience, at decisions guided by something more than mere strategy or counsel. Some claimed that they could read omens, interpret signs in nature, and wield influence that rippled subtly but powerfully across the lands they governed. To those who witnessed their reign, it was as though the Merovingians moved not merely as kings, but as stewards of an ancient secret, guardians of a current that flowed through history itself. Even as their influence spread, mysteries multiplied. Who had trained these kings in the ways of hidden knowledge? What rituals, what teachings, what esoteric wisdom were passed down in secret chambers and private ceremonies? And why does the fascination with their line endure? echoing across centuries and continents, long after the kingdoms they ruled have vanished into dust. Scholars often dismiss these tales as the embellishments of medieval chroniclers, eager to glorify kings and amplify their aura of authority. Yet the persistence of such legends, woven into both folklore and obscure historical records, suggests that there may be more than mere storytelling at play. Beneath the surface, there are symbols, signs, and fragments of knowledge that hint at an intelligence at work, one that sought to preserve, protect, and perhaps even manipulate the flow of history according to the continuity of a sacred line. It is in this intermingling of recorded history and whispered legend that the true story begins. The Merovingians were not simply rulers. They were the custodians of a hidden inheritance, a lineage whose significance might not always be evident to the casual eye, but whose echoes can still be traced in the subtle architecture of power and influence. Their blood, their name, and the secrets surrounding them have traveled through centuries, whispered in secret texts, encoded in symbols, and hidden in the folds of history where only the most careful seekers might glimpse them. Even today, in the quiet corners of Europe, in ruins and remote villages, their legacy lingers, not as overt dominion, but as a subtle, enduring presence that seems to shape events and decisions in ways both mysterious and profound. As this journey unfolds, the goal is not merely to recount history, but to trace these hidden currents of power, to follow the faint trails left by a dynasty whose story intertwines legend and fact, visible deeds and invisible influence. From the ancient courts of Gaul to the remote settlements across continents, the line of the Merovingians has left a trail of intrigue, mystery, and unanswered questions. Their story is not simply about kings or battles. It is about a current running beneath the surface of history, a current that continues to echo through time, guiding destinies, shaping events, and leaving behind traces of a power that, while hidden, remains undeniably potent. The story of the Merovingians is not merely a tale of kings and conquest, but of a dynasty whose rise was shrouded in both brilliance and secrecy. Emerging from the fragmented territories of early medieval Gaul, they carved out a realm in a time of chaos, when tribes, warlords, and fledgling kingdoms vied for survival. Yet, unlike other rulers of their era, the Merovingians' ascent was not simply a matter of military strength or political cunning. It was entwined with an aura of something more elusive, something that hinted at divine sanction, or perhaps an inherited wisdom that set them apart from ordinary men. Their story begins with the figure of Merovec, the legendary ancestor from whom the dynasty takes its name, a figure whose life straddled myth and history, whose very existence is a tantalizing mystery. Some chroniclers claimed he was descended from a sea creature or a godlike being, an origin that cast a shadow of sacredness over the entire bloodline. Whether these accounts are literal truth or metaphor, they indicate a perception of the Merovingians as rulers touched by forces beyond the ordinary world. By the time Clovis I, Meroveca's most famous descendant, rose to power, the dynasty had already begun to take on a mythic dimension. Clovis united the Frankish tribes under a single rule, a feat that altered the course of European history. Yet even here, the intrigue is subtle. Clovis' conversion to Christianity, often recounted in hagiographies and ecclesiastical histories, is not merely a spiritual narrative, but also a story of political maneuvering, alliance, and influence. To some, his baptism marked the merging of sacred authority with temporal power, a ritual that symbolically and perhaps practically sanctified the Merovingian bloodline. It was as though the very act of stepping into a church and accepting the sacraments served to legitimize not only his rule, but the hidden, enduring power carried in his veins. Throughout their reign, the Merovingians were considered long-haired kings, a designation that was far more than a stylistic choice. Their hair was a visible mark of divine favor, a constant, uncut emblem of the sacred continuity of their line. To cut, it would have been to symbolically sever their connection to the mystical force that sustained their authority. In this way, the Merovingians were both ordinary men and living symbols, embodiments of a power that was as much spiritual and secret as it was political. This distinction set them apart from their contemporaries, whose authority rested solely on conquest or inheritance. The Merovingians, by contrast, wielded a subtle, almost ineffable influence, a force that inspired loyalty, commanded attention, and instilled both fear and reverence in those who surrounded them. The courts of the Merovingians were no mere seats of governance. They were crucibles of ritual and subtle intrigue. Chroniclers hint at ceremonies whose full significance has been lost to time, rituals in which the king's presence, his actions, and even the way he wore his hair carried meaning beyond the immediate political sphere. The dynasty's advisors and courtiers were acutely aware of these symbols and the weight they carried, participating in a delicate choreography that intertwined power, mysticism, and tradition. Beyond the spectacle of kingship, there is a constant undercurrent of secrecy, knowledge shared only with the initiated, wisdom preserved and passed along in ways that left no trace in conventional historical records. Some modern scholars suggest that this hidden knowledge, encoded in rituals, symbols, and lineage, allowed the Merovingians to exercise influence far beyond what their armies or political alliances might suggest. Yet for all their power, the Merovingians were vulnerable to the very forces they sought to master. Rival nobles, ambitious bishops, and external invaders challenged their authority, and in response, the dynasty often relied on cunning, diplomacy, and perhaps even the subtle manipulation of perception. Legends speak of kings who could sense danger before it arrived, who navigated threats with an uncanny foresight. Whether these accounts are literal truth or the embellishments of chroniclers, they reinforce the idea that the Merovingians' authority was not solely derived from worldly might, but from a unique interplay of inherited wisdom, sacred symbolism, and political acumen. As the dynasty evolved, its influence spread across the territories of Gaul and beyond, leaving traces not only in the historical record but in the stories, symbols, and legends that survive to this day. Towns, churches, and even landscape features became associated with their line, markers of an influence that was often invisible but deeply felt. These subtle markers serve as clues, hints of a legacy deliberately preserved, even when the dynasty's overt political power began to wane. From a vantage point of modern inquiry, it is possible to see the Merovingians not just as rulers, but as architects of a hidden current, a line of authority that moved in parallel with recorded history, shaping events in ways both seen and unseen. To understand the Merovingians, then, is to understand a world in which power was not always public or explicit. It is to recognize a dynasty whose legacy is as much about secrecy, symbolism, and mystical inheritance as it is about kingship and conquest. From their mysterious origins to their rise as unifiers of tribes and builders of kingdoms, the Merovingians demonstrate a unique interplay between history and legend. Their reign invites us to look closer, to consider what might exist just beyond the reach of written records, and to explore a story in which blood, symbol, and influence intertwine to create a legacy that continues to resonate through the centuries. Beyond the visible reign of the Merovingians lies a deeper, more enigmatic layer of their power, one that intertwines blood, mysticism, and the whispers of an almost forgotten knowledge. The kings themselves were not merely political figures. They were living symbols, embodiments of sacred lineage, their authority rooted in something far older than the establishment of kingdoms or the shifting borders of Gaul. Their blood, according to legend, carried not only the right to rule, but also a mysterious energy, a force that could influence minds, shape events, and even command the loyalty of those around them in ways that transcended conventional authority. It was a notion that many dismissed as superstition, yet the persistence of such beliefs across centuries suggests that there was more at play than mere folklore. The Merovingians were considered, by those attuned to hidden knowledge, as vessels of a continuity of power, a living bridge between the mortal and the divine. Esoteric symbolism was woven into every aspect of their existence, from the simple to the sublime. Their long hair, never cut, was the most visible of these symbols, a constant and undeniable emblem of their sacred line. Yet beyond this, the fleur-de-lis, later immortalized in heraldry and royal iconography, is said to have been more than a decorative flourish. For the Merovingians, it represented an alignment with cosmic order, a subtle assertion of divine favor, and a coded marker of their hidden authority. Symbols such as these were carefully guarded, their meanings known only to those initiated into the inner workings of the dynasty. Through them, the Merovingians communicated a message that transcended language, a quiet proclamation that their rule was sanctioned by something greater than earthly power. The notion of sacred blood, often repeated in whispers and obscure manuscripts, was central to their mystique. Some chroniclers suggested that the Merovingians possessed the essence of a divine or semi-divine ancestor, a hereditary spark that set them apart from all other mortals. To contemporary observers, this was expressed through their charisma, their uncanny ability to command loyalty, and the aura of inevitability that seemed to surround their reign. But for those who looked closer, the idea of blood as power went beyond mere symbolism. It hinted at an ancient understanding of life itself, a recognition that certain lineages carried knowledge, influence, and perhaps even abilities that could shape the world in ways imperceptible to ordinary eyes. Legends tell of kings who could discern truths hidden from others, who moved events in subtle, almost imperceptible ways, as if they were guided by a force older than kingdoms and empires. Some say they could read omens in the natural world, interpret celestial patterns, and sense danger long before it arrived. Others speak of secret rituals, ceremonies performed at specific times and places, designed to sustain the continuity of the bloodline and ensure that its hidden wisdom would endure through generations. These rituals, if they occurred, were shrouded in secrecy, leaving behind only traces in cryptic texts, enigmatic symbols, and the occasional oblique reference in the writings of the era. To the casual observer, these details might seem fanciful or exaggerated. To the seeker of hidden truths, they suggest a deliberate preservation of power, a conscious effort to maintain an unbroken chain of influence that could survive the passage of time, war, and political upheaval. The Merovingians' connection to mysticism was also entwined with prophecy and foresight. Chronicles hint at seers and advisors who were close to the kings, individuals who could interpret visions, read the stars, or decode hidden patterns and events. Some scholars argue that these figures may have been symbolic rather than literal, representing the dynasty's own cultivated intuition and awareness of political and spiritual forces. Yet the persistence of these accounts, coupled with the reverence and fear they inspired, points to a society in which knowledge of the unseen was considered a legitimate form of authority. The Merovingians, in this view, were both students and custodians of hidden wisdom, using it to reinforce their rule while maintaining the delicate balance between what was known publicly and what remained secret. Art, architecture, and artifacts from their era bear witness to this intertwining of power and mystery. Sacred sites, cryptic inscriptions, and the careful placement of symbols within palaces and churches suggest an intentional communication with those attuned to their meaning. It is as if the very landscape and structures of their world were imbued with encoded messages, subtle reminders that their authority was part of a larger, more profound order. The Merovingians understood the power of perception, the ability to influence not just with armies and decrees, but through symbols, rituals, and the silent assertion of a sacred right. Yet for all the mystery and legend, the Merovingians' influence was also practical, grounded in the realities of rule. They combined their mystical persona with shrewd political strategy, forming alliances, quelling uprisings, and consolidating territories in ways that ensured the survival of their line. Their sacred blood was not a substitute for governance. It was a complement, a layer of authority that added weight to their decisions, lent legitimacy to their actions, and inspired loyalty that could not be commanded by force alone. This blending of the mystical and the practical created a dynasty that was simultaneously feared, respected, and enigmatic, a combination that allowed it to endure, even as other kingdoms rose and fell around it. The esoteric nature of the Merovingians invites us to reconsider the boundaries between history and legend, fact and myth. In studying their lives, we glimpse a civilization that recognized the potency of bloodlines, symbols, and secret knowledge. We see a dynasty that operated not just through laws and armies, but through a subtle current of influence, a continuity of power that may have touched every corner of their realm in ways that were invisible to the ordinary observer. The Merovingian story is therefore not merely one of kingship. It is a story of hidden authority, of sacred inheritance, and of the delicate interplay between the seen and unseen forces that shape the course of history. As the Merovingian dynasty solidified its power across early medieval Gaul, another force was quietly asserting its own authority, a force that would come to dominate the spiritual, political, and cultural landscape of Europe for centuries to come. The Christian Church, expanding rapidly in both influence and ambition, recognized the significance of the Merovingian bloodline, not merely as rulers, but as custodians of a hidden legacy that could challenge or even rival ecclesiastical authority. The Church's historical records are meticulous in recounting the deeds of kings, their wars, their baptisms, and their conversions, yet conspicuously silent on the subtler truths that lingered behind the throne. In the quiet spaces between these records, some historians suggest, lies a story of suppression and concealment, of knowledge deliberately obscured to maintain the monopoly of spiritual power. The tension between the Merovingians and the Church was never overtly violent, at least not in the traditional sense. There were no cataclysmic confrontations recorded in the annals. Instead, the struggle unfolded through subtle shifts, through narratives crafted by clerics, through the selective preservation and omission of documents. The Church sought to frame the Merovingians within a narrative it could control, emphasizing their public conversion to Christianity while downplaying or erasing references to their mystical attributes, sacred rituals, and claims of divine blood. The long hair, the rituals, the prophecies, and the esoteric knowledge that had surrounded the kings for generations were marginalized, cast into obscurity, or recast as superstition in order to prevent them from challenging ecclesiastical dominance. Even the legend of Clovis' baptism can be seen through this lens. While celebrated as a monumental Christian moment, it also served as a turning point in the Church's subtle effort to assert control over a line of kings whose authority might otherwise have been derived from sources outside clerical sanction. By presenting Clovis as a model Christian king, obedient to the Church and its rituals, the narrative reoriented the perception of the Merovingians' power, reframing it as something granted by the Church rather than inherited through sacred blood or mystical tradition. In this way, the dynasty's deeper esoteric significance was quietly eroded from public memory, leaving only fragments of the extraordinary legacy that once defined them. The suppression of knowledge extended beyond narrative control. Manuscripts, symbols, and artifacts that might have revealed the true scope of Merovingian influence were hidden, destroyed, or reinterpreted. Sacred texts and cryptic writings that contained references to rituals, hidden ceremonies, or prophetic knowledge were often sequestered within monastic libraries, their meanings altered, obscured, or deliberately misrepresented. Even architectural features and symbols, embedded with significance by the Merovingians themselves, were subject to reinterpretation, reframed as pious decoration or mythic ornamentation rather than markers of hidden knowledge. For the ordinary observer of the time, the dynasty's mystique became little more than legend, a story told in whispers and half-truths, while the underlying currents of influence persisted silently, safeguarded by a few and concealed from the majority. This effort at suppression was not merely about controlling information. It was about controlling perception. The Church understood that power is as much about belief as it is about force, and by shaping the narrative of the Merovingians, it could dictate the parameters within which people understood authority, sanctity, and legitimacy. Kings who were once seen as vessels of sacred blood were recast as compliant Christians, their mystical attributes minimized or dismissed. Their influence, though persistent and subtle, was reframed in a context that reinforced ecclesiastical supremacy. The hidden lineage, the sacred inheritance, and the esoteric rituals, all the things that gave the Merovingians their mysterious aura, were pushed to the margins, leaving the world with a version of history that emphasized compliance, conversion, and submission rather than continuity, sacred power, or hidden wisdom. Yet, despite these efforts, traces of the Merovingians' original legacy survived. Symbols persisted in architecture, art, and heraldry, often overlooked or misunderstood by those outside the inner circles of knowledge. Some chroniclers, perhaps sympathetic or simply attentive to subtle truths, left oblique references to rituals, prophetic signs, and sacred bloodlines. Folklore and oral tradition carried fragments of stories that the Church could not entirely suppress, tales of kings whose power was as much mystical as it was temporal. Even as the official records sought to marginalize them, these whispers endured, hinting at a reality that was far richer and more complex than what the surviving annals convey. The consequences of this suppression extended far beyond the medieval period. By obscuring the mystical and esoteric dimensions of the Merovingians, the Church shaped the way future generations would perceive the dynasty. Historians, writers, and scholars inherited a narrative that emphasized political deeds and Christian piety while leaving the extraordinary elements of the bloodline, the sacred inheritance, and the mystical practices largely unexplored. Yet for those willing to look beneath the surface, to read between the lines, these suppressed details offer tantalizing clues, a secret history that challenges conventional understanding, revealing a world in which power, knowledge, and lineage intersected in ways both profound and enigmatic. In the end, the story of the Merovingians is inseparable from the story of their suppression. Their hidden knowledge, their sacred blood, and their esoteric influence were neither fully destroyed nor fully acknowledged. Instead, they were pushed into shadow, carefully concealed, and partially rewritten to suit the interests of the Church. And it is within this shadowed space that the true intrigue of the dynasty resides, a world where power is not only wielded openly, but also quietly preserved, encoded in rituals, symbols, and lineages that continue to elude discovery. To explore the Merovingians, therefore, is not only to study the history of kings, but to uncover a hidden current of influence, a legacy of secrecy and suppression, and a story that continues to challenge and fascinate those who dare to look beyond the surface of recorded history. The story of the Merovingians cannot be told without invoking the enduring mystery of the Holy Grail, a symbol whose meaning has shifted through the centuries, blending history, legend, and hidden knowledge. While the popular imagination often envisions the Grail as a chalice of miraculous properties, the connection to the Merovingians suggests something deeper, something far more enigmatic, that the Grail may have represented not a physical object, but the continuity of a sacred bloodline, a lineage imbued with mystical authority and hidden power. To understand this, One must step beyond the familiar stories of knights and quests and into a world where myth and history intersect, where symbols encode truths long hidden, and where the very notion of kingship is intertwined with divine inheritance. Legends of the Grail begin to emerge in medieval Europe at a time when the Merovingians' influence, though diminished politically, was still alive in secret traditions and whispered accounts. In these tales, the Grail is not merely a vessel, but a marker, a representation of a continuity that transcends time and geography. Some esoteric scholars propose that the Grail symbolized the sacred blood of the Merovingian line, preserved through generations, sanctified not by ritual alone, but by the inherent nature of the lineage itself. This interpretation transforms the Grail from an object of quest to a concept of power, a living thread connecting the divine, the mystical, and the political. It is less a cup to be held and more a force to be safeguarded, a legacy carried quietly through history. The symbolism of the Grail is deeply embedded in the narratives surrounding the Merovingians. Their long hair, their rituals, their enigmatic presence, all could be seen as outward expressions of the same continuity the Grail represents. Just as knights were said to seek the Grail, so too did the Merovingians guard the integrity of their bloodline, ensuring that it remained pure, secret, and potent. Legends suggest that the Grail was a key to understanding the very nature of power in their era, a symbol through which divine right, mystical inheritance, and earthly authority converged. In this way, the quest for the Grail is mirrored in the careful preservation of the Merovingian line, a hidden pursuit undertaken not by armies or explorers, but by generations of kings and their closest advisors. Stories of the Grail often speak of trials, secrecy, and protection, and these elements resonate with the historical record of the Merovingians. Kingship was not merely a matter of decree or battlefield victories. It was a sacred responsibility, a guardianship of knowledge, blood, and influence. The dynasty's emphasis on secrecy, ritual, and symbolism may reflect an understanding that the line itself was the Grail, a vessel of power that required vigilance, discretion, and careful stewardship. In this sense, the Grail was never lost. It was preserved in plain sight, encoded in the symbols, ceremonies, and even the daily lives of the kings, accessible only to those who knew where and how to look. The Grail's journey through history parallels the fate of the Merovingians themselves. As political power shifted and dynasties rose and fell, the sacred bloodline endured, sometimes in shadow, sometimes in exile, but never entirely extinguished. The Church, ever vigilant in shaping historical narrative, reframed the legends to suit its purposes, focusing on spiritual miracles and moral lessons while obscuring the connection to lineage and blood. Yet fragments of knowledge persisted. In architecture, in cryptic texts, in folklore passed through generations. Hints that the Grail's meaning was far more than the literal vessel imagined by popular imagination. It became, in essence, a symbol of continuity, a code for those who understood its deeper significance. Some historians and esoteric scholars have traced the threads of Grail legends to secretive groups and societies, suggesting that knowledge of the Merovingian bloodline and its associated power may have been preserved deliberately, hidden from the mainstream world. The Grail, in this context, is a cipher, a story told in layers, designed to protect both the bloodline and the wisdom it carries. Knights, priests, and secretive guardians became stewards of this knowledge, passing it down through generations, encoding it in rituals, art, and literature. To the uninitiated, the Grail remained a tale of chivalry and adventure. To the initiated, it was a map of power, a key to understanding the hidden currents that flowed beneath the surface of history. This interpretation challenges conventional narratives, but is consistent with a recurring pattern. Symbols, myths, and rituals in the Merovingian world were never arbitrary. They were carefully constructed, preserved, and interpreted in ways that maintained the dynasty's mystique and influence even when political power was no longer overt. The Grail becomes, therefore, both metaphor and reality, a conceptual framework through which sacred blood, hidden knowledge, and the legacy of the Merovingians are understood. It is a reminder that history is not always what it seems, that behind every legend may lie a thread of truth, a continuity of power, and a secret preserved against the sweep of centuries. To follow the story of the Grail is to follow the story of the Merovingians themselves, a path that winds through history, myth, and secrecy, connecting sacred bloodlines with hidden knowledge, divine right with human ambition, and legend with tangible, though often invisible, influence. It is a journey into a world where symbols speak louder than words, where secrecy is the ultimate currency of power, and where the line between history and myth is as delicate as it is revealing. In this sense, the Grail is never lost. It lives on in the blood, the traditions, and the stories that have survived the passage of time, inviting those who seek to uncover not just an object, but a hidden legacy, a line of power that continues to echo through the centuries. Long after the Merovingians' political power waned in Europe, the echoes of their lineage appear to have traveled far beyond the familiar landscapes of Gaul and Francia. Some historians and esoteric scholars propose that members of the dynasty, or those closely connected to them, may have crossed the Atlantic centuries before the well-documented waves of European migration, seeking refuge, opportunity, or a fresh canvas upon which to preserve their sacred line. The story of the Acadian settlements, in particular, provides tantalizing clues. These remote colonies, established in what is now eastern Canada, exhibit patterns that seem curious when viewed through the lens of hidden lineage and deliberate influence. Patterns of settlement, naming, and social organization that hint at a guiding hand, subtle yet unmistakable, shaping the course of these communities. The idea that Merovingian descendants could have made their way to the New World invites questions that challenge conventional history. Why Acadia, of all places? The region was isolated, harsh, and strategically remote, far from the centers of power in Europe. Yet this very isolation may have been its appeal. Here, a line of sacred blood could continue its legacy, protected from prying eyes, the scrutiny of rival powers, and the slow but relentless reach of ecclesiastical authority. In this new world, the line could flourish quietly, preserving traditions, rituals, and perhaps even secret knowledge passed down through generations, untouched by the forces that had sought to suppress it in Europe. The settlements themselves, though ostensibly ordinary, bear traces of careful planning and symbolic intent. Towns and villages were established in precise configurations, sometimes echoing patterns found in European sacred sites. Names of places, rivers, and landmarks often mirror those associated with Merovingian history, suggesting a deliberate effort to recreate, in miniature, a landscape imbued with meaning. Folklore in these communities, preserved in oral traditions, contains stories of mysterious benefactors, cryptic advice, and events that hint at a hidden continuity of influence. It is as if the settlers carried with them not just families and possessions, but the very memory of a line that demanded careful guardianship, a knowledge of power encoded into the very fabric of their new world. Some records suggest that these early settlers maintained networks with Europe, transmitting information, ritual knowledge, and symbolic markers back and forth across the ocean. Letters, coded manuscripts, and clandestine meetings may have preserved the essence of the Merovingian heritage in ways invisible to mainstream historians. In this context, the Atlantic becomes not merely a physical divide, but a veil of protection, a space where a hidden lineage could endure, evolve, and influence the unfolding history of the continent without attracting unwanted attention. It is a vision of continuity, not conquest, of preservation, not dominance. The question of influence is especially compelling when one examines the social structure of these Acadian communities. Leaders often emerged with uncanny foresight, resolving conflicts, directing resources, and guiding migrations in ways that suggest knowledge beyond the ordinary. Some scholars speculate that these patterns reflect the presence of an inherited understanding of leadership, strategy, and diplomacy, wisdom passed down from a line that had for centuries intertwined sacred authority with political acumen. In this light, the settlement of Acadia may have been more than a simple act of colonization. It may have been a deliberate extension of a hidden legacy, a new chapter in a story that began in the courts of early medieval Europe. The notion of migration is further complicated by accounts of extraordinary survivals and improbable successes. Families associated with these lines often prospered in harsh conditions, navigating political pressures, environmental challenges, and external threats with a resilience that seems almost preternatural. Some argue this resilience is more than mere coincidence. It is the continuation of a cultivated lineage, one whose members were trained in discretion, strategy, and the careful exercise of influence. Every decision, every settlement pattern, and every preserved tradition may have been guided by an understanding of legacy that transcended the immediate struggles of survival, reflecting the careful stewardship of an inheritance far older than the colonies themselves. Yet the Acadian connection also carries with it tragedy and displacement. Wars, forced migrations, and political pressures repeatedly disrupted these communities, scattering families and dispersing their networks. In each disruption, however, traces of continuity remain. Hidden symbols, oral histories, and clandestine practices that endured despite adversity. Even when the physical presence of a line was diminished, its memory and influence persisted, whispering through the generations, suggesting that true power is not always visible, and that a sacred inheritance can survive even when it appears to vanish from sight. Artifacts and architectural traces in Acadia add another layer to the mystery. Some churches, homesteads, and town layouts bear geometric alignments reminiscent of European sacred sites associated with the Merovingians. While these details could be coincidental, the repetition of patterns and the preservation of certain traditions suggest a deliberate intent, a subtle imprint of a lineage seeking to maintain its identity across oceans. It is as if the Merovingian legacy had been transplanted, carefully nurtured in secret, and allowed to grow quietly in a new land, hidden from history, yet quietly shaping it nonetheless. The migration to Acadia, when viewed through this lens, becomes more than a story of geography and settlement. It is a story of survival, secrecy, and the quiet endurance of a line that had been threatened, suppressed, and marginalized in its homeland. Across the Atlantic, the Merovingians, or those connected to them, found a space where they could preserve the continuity of their sacred inheritance, where rituals, traditions, and symbols could be maintained out of reach of prying eyes. It is a testament to the persistence of hidden influence, the enduring power of lineage, and the way in which history can carry secrets across oceans and centuries, leaving traces for those willing to look beneath the surface. In exploring this chapter of the Merovingian story, one begins to see the contours of a far-reaching narrative. The Atlantic is not merely a geographic boundary. It is a conduit for legacy. The Acadian settlements are not just isolated communities. They are nodes in a hidden network, living expressions of a bloodline that defied suppression and exile. By tracing these connections, by examining the patterns, traditions, and symbols left behind, we glimpse a continuity of power that stretches from the royal courts of medieval Europe to the quiet forests and shores of early colonial North America. A hidden line that carries with it both the weight of history and the promise of secrets yet to be fully revealed. The story of the Merovingians is inseparable from the idea of guardianship, the notion that a sacred line, once threatened by conquest, suppression, and exile, required vigilant protectors to preserve its knowledge, symbols, and influence. These were not mere courtiers or advisors. They were custodians of secrets, individuals entrusted with the careful maintenance of a legacy whose importance extended far beyond the political sphere. Some scholars and esoteric researchers suggest that secret societies and clandestine networks may have emerged specifically to safeguard the Merovingian bloodline, passing knowledge down through generations in coded language, rituals, and carefully maintained traditions. These guardians operated in the shadows, aware that the visible world often misunderstood or actively sought to suppress what they protected. From the earliest days of the dynasty, the idea of secrecy appears woven into the very fabric of Merovingian rule. Rituals were conducted away from prying eyes, ceremonies encoded with meaning that could only be interpreted by those initiated into the line's mysteries. Advisors and confidants were chosen not only for loyalty, but for their ability to understand, preserve, and transmit knowledge. These guardians acted as living vessels, ensuring that the line of power remained intact even when kings themselves were vulnerable. In this context, the Merovingians were not solitary figures, but the center of an intricate web of guardianship, a network designed to protect the continuity of sacred blood, hidden wisdom, and mystical authority. The existence of such secretive custodians is supported by recurring references in both historical documents and esoteric literature. Chroniclers sometimes hint at individuals who exerted influence behind the throne, shaping decisions, guiding heirs, and even directing the course of political events. In folklore, these figures appear as mysterious mentors or shadowy advisors, often disappearing from public record, but leaving traces in architecture, manuscripts, and oral tradition. Scholars who study symbols and encoded messages in medieval texts argue that these individuals played a key role in maintaining continuity, ensuring that knowledge lost to the public remained alive within carefully guarded circles. Secret societies dedicated to the preservation of Merovingian influence may also have extended beyond Europe, traveling with exiled families or those seeking refuge in remote regions such as Acadia. Letters, manuscripts, and cryptic communications suggest the existence of networks that span continents, connecting those who understood the true significance of the bloodline. These guardians ensured that traditions, rituals, and symbols were preserved in secrecy, allowing the Merovingian legacy to endure across generations, even when external forces, political, religious, or social, sought to erase it. In this sense, secrecy was not merely a precaution. It was an essential strategy for survival, a deliberate choice to maintain continuity against the pressures of a world that often misunderstood or feared the power they protected. The methods of preservation were varied and complex. Symbols were encoded in art, architecture, and manuscripts. Rituals were designed to be intelligible only to the initiated, layered with multiple meanings to protect the core truths. Oral traditions carried coded messages, stories that appeared as folklore to outsiders but contained instructions, warnings, or guidance for those within the network. Even the use of bloodlines themselves as carriers of influence can be seen as a strategy of secrecy. Knowledge embedded in the family, passed silently from one generation to the next, safeguarded by those sworn to protect it. In this way, the line of power could survive disruption, exile, and persecution, hidden in plain sight, yet carefully maintained by dedicated custodians. The role of these guardians was not solely defensive. They also acted as guides and interpreters, helping each generation of Merovingians understand their own legacy and the responsibilities it entailed. In some cases, these advisors may have provided instruction in esoteric knowledge, strategy, diplomacy, or mystical understanding, ensuring that each heir was prepared to assume the mantle of sacred authority. They preserved the rituals, symbols, and coded wisdom that connected the kings not only to their ancestors, but to the broader currents of hidden influence that flowed beneath the surface of history. Through their guidance, the Merovingians were able to exert a subtle yet persistent power that extended far beyond the battlefield or the throne room. The existence of such networks also helps explain the endurance of the Merovingian legacy across centuries and geographies. Even when political dominance faded, the line's influence persisted through guardians who acted as keepers of continuity. By carefully controlling knowledge and guiding heirs, they ensured that the sacred bloodline remained intact, that symbols were preserved, and that the hidden currents of influence could continue. From Europe to Acadia, from obscure manuscripts to oral traditions, traces of their work can still be discerned for those willing to look beneath the surface. The notion of secret guardians invites a re-evaluation of the Merovingians' place in history. They were not merely kings whose power declined over time. They were the center of a hidden network, a lineage carefully preserved by those who understood its significance. Their influence was both visible and invisible, political and mystical, temporal and eternal. It is this duality, public kingship and hidden legacy, that has allowed the Merovingian story to endure, inspiring myths, legends, and the fascination of modern researchers who continue to trace the threads of their influence through centuries of history. In examining the role of secret societies and guardians, we begin to see the Merovingians not as a historical curiosity, but as participants in a carefully orchestrated system of continuity. Knowledge, blood, and symbols were intertwined in a deliberate strategy to preserve power, maintain identity, and influence events quietly yet decisively. These guardians ensured that even when the political landscape shifted, when kings were deposed, and when public memory was reshaped by church or state, the essence of the Merovingian legacy endured. They were the hidden stewards of a sacred inheritance, the silent keepers of a line whose significance extends far beyond what ordinary records can capture. Ultimately, the story of the Merovingians and their secret guardians challenges us to reconsider what power truly means. It is not always measured by armies, decrees, or kingdoms. It is sometimes measured by continuity, secrecy, and the careful preservation of knowledge across generations. The guardians were the unseen architects of this enduring influence, ensuring that a sacred line, threatened by history and suppressed by authority, could survive, adapt, and continue to resonate through time. In understanding their role, we glimpse a hidden dimension of history, one where power is quiet, subtle, and enduring, shaping the world in ways that only reveal themselves to those willing to look beyond the surface. Even centuries after the decline of their political power, the Merovingians' influence seems to ripple subtly through the corridors of history, manifesting in ways that are difficult to trace, yet unmistakable once patterns emerge. Their sacred bloodline, carefully preserved by generations of guardians, may have left traces in families, institutions, and cultural traditions across Europe and beyond. Scholars and esoteric researchers point to a persistent undercurrent of influence, an inheritance not of crowns or armies, but of knowledge, symbolism, and social sway that continues to echo through time. The lineage's impact, often invisible to mainstream history, invites a reconsideration of how power and legacy can endure in forms far more subtle than conquest or legislation. In examining modern traces of Merovingian influence, one encounters both mystery and suggestion. Certain noble families, often overlooked in historical studies, display genealogical connections that hint at ties to the ancient dynasty. While official records may obscure these connections, patterns in naming conventions, marriages, and inheritance practices suggest deliberate attempts to maintain a lineage, quietly safeguarding both identity and influence. These families may serve as living repositories of traditions, customs, and symbolic knowledge passed down through the centuries, their presence a testament to the continuity of the Merovingian bloodline. Beyond mere genealogy, these threads suggest that sacred inheritance can survive not through overt power, but through the careful cultivation of legacy within private, tightly controlled networks. The cultural impact of the Merovingians is equally intriguing. Symbols once associated with their dynasty, such as the fleur-de-lis, architectural motifs, or emblematic patterns, appear throughout European art, literature, and even in aspects of governance and ceremonial practice. While these symbols have often been reinterpreted over time, their persistence suggests an enduring influence, subtle but deliberate, shaping perception, identity, and authority. In some instances, these motifs are preserved in ways that obscure their original intent, functioning as hidden markers of continuity for those who recognize their significance. They are silent reminders of a line that has survived both time and suppression, quietly embedding its legacy into the fabric of culture. Even modern institutions may carry echoes of this hidden influence. Certain secretive societies, philanthropic networks, or esoteric circles appear to preserve knowledge, ritual, or symbolism that can be traced back to traditions associated with the Merovingians. While it is difficult to draw direct lines of inheritance, the alignment of symbols, practices, and philosophical principles suggests a continuity of understanding, a preservation of wisdom that transcends centuries. These networks may operate quietly, their impact unseen by mainstream society, yet their role in maintaining a hidden lineage of influence is consistent with the historical patterns established by the dynasty's original guardians. The interplay between secrecy and visibility is central to understanding the Merovingians' modern legacy. Their influence is not overt. It does not manifest in proclamations or banners, but in subtle forms of guidance, the careful transmission of knowledge, and the cultivation of networks designed to preserve continuity. Whether in the form of ritual, symbol, familial legacy, or institutional practice, these traces suggest that the dynasty's sacred inheritance has persisted, adapting to new contexts while maintaining its core principles. It is a demonstration of resilience, one that emphasizes discretion, strategic foresight, and the enduring power of hidden authority. Prophecies and folklore continue to reinforce the mystique of the Merovingian line in modern times. Stories of kings, sacred blood, and hidden heirs persist not only in historical texts but also in literature, popular culture, and esoteric discourse. These narratives serve a dual purpose. They inspire curiosity, wonder, and investigation, while simultaneously acting as coded repositories of knowledge for those attuned to their deeper meanings. Folklore, myth, and legend thus operate as a bridge, connecting the medieval world of the Merovingians with contemporary seekers of hidden truth, offering glimpses into a lineage that has survived against both suppression and oblivion. The persistence of these traces also raises questions about power, authority, and influence in the modern world. If the Merovingians' sacred lineage has survived through centuries of suppression, exile, and migration, what might this tell us about the nature of hidden power? The dynasty's story challenges conventional assumptions about history, suggesting that influence need not be visible to be effective. Authority can reside in bloodlines, in symbols, in networks, and in knowledge preserved and transmitted quietly, shaping events in ways that are difficult to detect but profoundly consequential. In this way, the Merovingian legacy becomes both a historical puzzle and a lens through which to explore broader questions about continuity, secrecy, and the subtle currents of power that run beneath the surface of society. Even the geographic dispersal of Merovingian influence hints at a deliberate strategy of survival. From Europe to Acadia, and perhaps beyond, the careful placement of descendants, the preservation of traditions, and the encoding of knowledge in symbols and rituals all point to a lineage intent on endurance rather than domination. This strategy emphasizes patience, foresight, and the understanding that true power often operates quietly, manifesting across generations rather than within a single lifetime. The modern echoes of this approach are evident in how certain families, institutions, and esoteric networks maintain influence and continuity, preserving both identity and purpose across centuries. In reflecting upon the Merovingians' enduring legacy, it becomes clear that their story is not confined to the past. The dynasty's influence continues to ripple subtly through modern society, encoded in symbols, preserved in bloodlines, and maintained through clandestine networks. It is a legacy of patience, secrecy, and careful stewardship, a testament to the enduring power of knowledge and inheritance when wielded wisely. In tracing these currents, we gain not only a deeper understanding of the Merovingians themselves, but also a broader insight into the ways in which hidden authority, sacred lineage, and preserved knowledge can shape the course of history in ways that are often invisible yet undeniably potent. Ultimately, the modern legacy of the Merovingians invites both curiosity and contemplation. It challenges us to look beyond conventional historical narratives, to consider the subtle forms of influence that persist quietly over centuries, and to recognize that power is not always defined by conquest or public acclaim. Instead, it may reside in bloodlines, symbols, and networks carefully preserved through secrecy, ritual, and foresight. In exploring these hidden threads, we begin to understand the full scope of the Merovingian story, a story that stretches from medieval Gaul to modern society, a story of sacred inheritance, enduring influence, and a line of power that continues to echo through time. Prophecies have always captivated human imagination, offering glimpses of the unseen and hints of destiny. Within the labyrinth of Merovingian lore, these forewarnings take on a particularly enigmatic character. Across centuries, various prophets, mystics, and chroniclers have hinted at a lineage that carried not only blood, but also a weight of fate, a power that could shape the course of nations. Some accounts speak of kings with sacred blood whose presence could influence kingdoms, while others hint at hidden heirs who would appear in times of great upheaval, their roles veiled by secrecy and the passage of time. These prophecies are rarely straightforward. They are layered with symbolism, obscure language, and cryptic references that only the initiated could decipher. From medieval manuscripts to whispered oral traditions in the remote valleys of Europe, tales persist of individuals marked by their ancestry, destined to fulfill roles both grand and mysterious. Certain texts speak of a hidden king or a savior from obscurity, whose bloodline carries the memory of a divine covenant. Such claims, while often dismissed by mainstream historians as fanciful or mythical, are treated with reverence in esoteric circles. The language of these prophecies is deliberately elusive, crafted to conceal truths from those who might misuse or seek to suppress them. Symbols, allegories, and encoded messages appear repeatedly, as if the lineage itself left traces for future generations to uncover, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Prophecies associated with the Merovingians are not merely historical curiosities. They intertwine with the very idea of hidden knowledge and concealed power. Some suggest that the dynasty's influence extends beyond Europe, casting shadows over distant lands where their descendants might have fled. In North America, for instance, Acadian communities may have become unwitting custodians of these prophetic threads, their folklore preserving hints of the Merovingian legacy under the guise of everyday stories. Festivals, rituals, and even naming conventions carry echoes of this hidden influence, a quiet reminder that the past often leaves its fingerprints on the present in subtle and untraceable ways. The mystical lens through which these prophecies are interpreted also introduces an element of suspense. Unlike straightforward historical records, prophecies demand interpretation, inviting debate and speculation. They suggest that power is not solely a matter of politics or conquest, but is intertwined with spiritual heritage, the invisible currents of bloodlines, and the unseen hand of destiny. The narratives imply that history itself may bend around these secret lineages, revealing selective truths to maintain balance between revelation and concealment. For the attentive observer, patterns emerge across centuries, a subtle choreography that hints at deliberate design, guiding events and shaping outcomes while remaining largely imperceptible to the masses. By examining these prophetic texts and traditions, a pattern begins to emerge, one that suggests the Merovingian bloodline was more than a matter of royal succession. It becomes a thread connecting disparate times, places, and peoples, a hidden rhythm beneath the surface of recorded history. The prophecies, often dismissed as legend, may contain kernels of truth about survival, secrecy, and influence that stretch far beyond what any historical record can confirm. They create a compelling tension, leaving the viewer to wonder, what if these ancient words were not merely allegory, but coded warnings or instructions meant to guide those who could decipher them? The mystery deepens, drawing the audience further into a world where the lines between myth and reality blur, and where the legacy of the Merovingians pulses quietly beneath the surface, waiting for recognition. Archaeology has always held a certain allure, a promise of uncovering truths long buried beneath the soil and stone of history. When it comes to the Merovingian bloodline, however, this pursuit takes on an almost conspiratorial edge. Tombs, relics, and hidden artifacts appear throughout Europe like scattered breadcrumbs, each piece hinting at a power and influence deliberately obscured by time and human intervention. Some of these sites are well documented, though their deeper significance is rarely acknowledged in mainstream scholarship. Others remain shrouded in legend, their very existence a subject of speculation whispered in private circles and esoteric societies. The sense of discovery is not just academic. It is profoundly cinematic, as if stepping into these spaces allows one to touch the very veins of history where secrets have been fiercely guarded. Merovingian tombs, often unremarkable to the casual observer, conceal layers of symbolism that suggest more than mere royal burial. Some scholars and independent researchers point to unusual orientations, hidden chambers, or inscriptions that hint at an otherworldly significance. Coins, jewelry, and ceremonial objects unearthed within these tombs often bear symbols that, to the untrained eye, are ornamental, but when interpreted through esoteric frameworks, they appear to encode genealogical, spiritual, or political information. Each artifact is a potential key, a silent witness to histories that powerful institutions may have preferred to leave unexamined. Even architecture itself, churches, crypts, and abbeys built under Merovingian patronage, sometimes hides secretive elements, geometric alignments, and sacred numerology that suggest deliberate design far beyond the visible function of structure. Relics connected to the Merovingians are no less tantalizing. Sacred chalices, reliquaries, and ritual objects associated with the dynasty carry an aura of mystery, and in some accounts, an almost mystical potency. Legends abound of these items being moved, stolen, or hidden in secret vaults to protect their significance from inquisitive eyes. In some cases, these relics have been traced to monasteries, private collections, or even forgotten corners of European castles, their provenance deliberately obscured to prevent recognition. The stories surrounding them often suggest that they were not merely ceremonial, but practical conduits of knowledge, holding within them encoded truths about bloodlines, sacred authority, or even mystical power that could influence rulers and empires. Beyond the tangible artifacts, documents and manuscripts play a crucial role in this archaeological tapestry. Scrolls, codices, and letters, often dismissed by mainstream historians as minor or irrelevant, may contain genealogical records or coded messages intended to preserve the memory of the Merovingian line. Certain marginal notes, cryptic diagrams, or unusual phrasing hint at a knowledge deliberately shielded from the public, a way to safeguard heritage without exposing it to potential enemies. The act of uncovering these texts is not only a scholarly challenge, but a narrative journey, where each fragment contributes to a slowly emerging picture of a dynasty whose influence was never entirely extinguished, even when the world at large thought it had been forgotten. Even the act of locating these sites carries its own aura of suspense and adventure. Remote locations, secret passages, and natural landscapes often play into the narrative, as if the Merovingians themselves anticipated the passage of time and the potential for discovery. Archaeologists, historians, and independent researchers retracing these paths find themselves following a trail that seems deliberately designed to separate the unworthy or uninitiated from those capable of understanding the deeper truths. In this sense, the study of Merovingian archaeology is less about excavation alone and more about unlocking hidden narratives, a cinematic quest that blurs the line between historical fact, legend, and the conspiratorial shadows that history has left behind. Through these tombs, relics, and manuscripts, a pattern begins to emerge, a network of hidden knowledge, carefully maintained over centuries, surviving wars, political upheavals, and religious suppression. Each discovery, no matter how small, suggests that the Merovingians were far more than a fleeting dynasty. They were custodians of power, knowledge, and influence that persisted long after their political reign ended. For the modern observer, there's a thrilling tension between what can be proven and what must be inferred, a sense that history has deliberately left gaps for the attentive and the curious to fill. Archaeology, in this context, becomes not only a tool of discovery, but a lens into a hidden reality, where bloodlines, secrets, and power converge, waiting for those willing to look beyond the surface of accepted history. The story of the Merovingians does not end in Europe. In fact, some theories suggest it only truly begins to unfold when their descendants cross the Atlantic, carrying secrets that would quietly influence the New World. North America, with its vast, uncharted lands and fledgling settlements, became a canvas upon which hidden histories could be preserved and protected. Among the earliest sites of this mysterious migration were the French colonies, particularly those that later became known as Acadia, a region encompassing parts of modern-day Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island. Within these communities, settlers may have carried not only their language, culture, and traditions, but also the silent legacy of a bloodline that European powers sought to suppress or erase. Genealogical traces in Acadian records hint at families who valued secrecy and resilience above all else. Names, dates, and marriages carefully preserved through parish registers reveal patterns that suggest deliberate efforts to protect certain lineages. Oral traditions supplement these records, with stories passed down through generations that, on the surface, appear to be simple folk tales. Yet, closer examination reveals motifs remarkably similar to those found in Merovingian legends. Hidden heirs, sacred duties, and the survival of a chosen few against overwhelming odds. It is as if these communities functioned as living archives, keeping the memory and influence of the Merovingian bloodline alive while outwardly appearing as ordinary settlers. The Acadian landscape itself offered both refuge and challenge. Harsh winters, isolated settlements, and treacherous waterways made survival difficult, yet they also provided natural protection for those intent on maintaining secrecy. Families could live relatively undisturbed, preserving their traditions without interference from colonial authorities or rival powers. In this isolation, elements of ritual, language, and even local governance may have developed unique characteristics, encoding symbols and practices inherited from European ancestors. These subtle cultural markers acted as quiet reminders of a hidden past, forming an invisible network of continuity across continents and generations. Migration patterns following political upheavals further complicated this story. Events such as the Great Expulsion of the Acadians in the 18th century scattered communities across distant regions, including Louisiana, Quebec, and even the Caribbean. While the majority of histories focus on the hardships of displacement, a deeper reading suggests that such dispersal may have inadvertently helped preserve and spread the hidden lineages. Families forced to relocate maintained their secrecy while integrating into new regions, creating nodes of Merovingian influence in places far removed from their European origins. Oral traditions, personal heirlooms, and subtle cultural practices traveled with them, forming a dispersed but resilient network of historical continuity that mainstream history rarely acknowledges. In Louisiana, the Acadian exiles found fertile ground for rebuilding. Here, the descendants of displaced families interwove their traditions with local influences, creating a cultural tapestry that still carries echoes of an ancient European past. Certain rituals, naming patterns, and even architectural choices appear to contain hidden codes or symbolic references, suggesting a conscious effort to preserve ancestral knowledge. Within these communities, the line between myth and memory becomes intentionally blurred. The stories people tell on the surface may conceal far older truths. It is in these subtle, everyday practices that the hidden Merovingian bloodline may have continued to exert influence, shaping identities and social dynamics while remaining invisible to outside observers. The North American connection ultimately reinforces the broader narrative of survival, secrecy, and adaptation. By tracing these hidden lineages across continents, one begins to see history not as a linear progression of kings and battles, but as a complex network of hidden currents, flowing beneath the surface of recorded events. The Merovingian descendants in Acadian communities serve as living testaments to this hidden continuity, their lives silently bridging the past and the present. Every document, artifact, or whispered story becomes a piece of a puzzle that stretches across oceans and centuries, suggesting that the power and knowledge of the Merovingians were never truly lost. They were simply carried, hidden, and adapted to survive in a world that may have sought to erase them. Language and culture often act as silent vessels for history, carrying truths across generations in ways that are subtle yet profound. In the case of the Merovingian descendants who settled in Acadia and later Louisiana, it is within these seemingly ordinary aspects of life that hidden messages and codes may have been preserved. From the dialects spoken to the folklore shared around hearths, there are traces of a past carefully veiled, a lineage intent on maintaining its secrecy while still signaling its presence to those capable of understanding. The idea that knowledge and bloodlines could survive through cultural memory, rather than written records, challenges conventional historical narratives and suggests a more layered, concealed form of continuity. Within the linguistic patterns of Acadian communities, there exist words, phrases, and naming conventions that hint at deliberate preservation of ancestral knowledge. Certain surnames recur in specific regions, often linked to tales of resilience, leadership, or secret guardianship. Oral storytelling, long considered mere entertainment or local color, may in fact encode historical events, allegiances, and genealogical information. Folk tales of hidden kings, miraculous survival, or divine intervention are not simply fanciful stories. They may represent allegorical maps of lineage, carefully transmitted under the guise of legend. In this sense, language itself becomes a coded medium, carrying secrets of heritage and identity across centuries. Rituals and customs also serve as repositories of hidden knowledge. Celebrations, seasonal festivals, and family rites may preserve elements of Merovingian symbolism adapted to the New World context. Gestures, Songs or ceremonial acts, seemingly innocuous to outsiders, can hold layered meanings, encoding concepts of leadership, spiritual authority, or sacred obligation. These practices operate as both memory and protection. They reinforce group identity while concealing the deeper significance from those not initiated. The cultural landscape of these communities thus functions as a living archive, where every habit, every story, and every ritual may carry a fragment of a much larger historical puzzle. Subtle symbolism also appears in architecture, land use, and even communal organization. The layout of settlements, the positioning of homes and meeting places, and the naming of geographic features may encode patterns familiar to those with knowledge of Merovingian traditions. Streams, hills, and roads may be more than natural features. They could act as markers, mnemonic devices, or directional guides for those who understand their hidden significance. In these ways, the physical environment becomes a silent collaborator in preserving the legacy of a bloodline, embedding history into the very landscape of North America. This interplay between culture, language, and hidden lineage suggests a deliberate, long-term strategy of survival. While political upheavals, exiles, and forced migrations threaten to erase memory, these subtle codes allow the essence of the Merovingian line to persist. Even centuries later, scholars and genealogists find themselves tracing these threads, uncovering connections that hint at a coherent, concealed system of preservation. What seems ordinary to an uninformed observer, a song, a story, a family name, may in fact be a piece of a sophisticated historical network, silently maintaining continuity across time and space. Ultimately, the study of linguistic and cultural codes reveals that history is not solely contained in documents or monuments. Knowledge can be encoded in everyday life, surviving in ways invisible to the casual eye. For the Merovingian descendants in Acadian and later Louisiana communities, this strategy of concealment was both practical and profound. By embedding meaning into the routines, stories, and expressions of daily life, they ensure that the line of power, influence, and sacred blood could endure. It is in this quiet persistence, in the patterns of culture and language, that the hidden lines of power remain most compelling, a testament to the subtle, enduring ways in which history can survive when the world is intent on forgetting. History is not a gentle current. It is a storm sweeping through lives, communities, and bloodlines, testing endurance and adaptability. For the Merovingian descendants within Acadian communities, survival was not merely a question of food or shelter. It was a matter of preserving identity, knowledge, and heritage in the face of relentless adversity. Wars, forced exiles, and colonial conflicts repeatedly disrupted lives, scattering families and threatening to erase centuries of hidden history. Yet, in these trials, the lines of power endured, often silently, quietly, and with remarkable resilience. The Great Expulsion, known as Le Grand Arrangement, stands as one of the most dramatic episodes in this narrative, a tragic event that would both fracture communities and, paradoxically, ensure the survival of their secrets. During the mid-18th century, British forces forcibly removed thousands of Acadians from their homes in Nova Scotia and surrounding regions. Families were separated, communities dismantled, and possessions destroyed. To the outside world, this was an episode of political maneuvering and colonial consolidation. Yet beneath the surface, a deeper story unfolds. Families who may have been custodians of the Merovingian legacy found themselves tested, compelled to hide their identities, and forced to adapt to new lands while maintaining the threads of their heritage. The trauma of displacement was immense, but it also created conditions for secrecy to flourish as scattered populations became hidden nodes of influence in far-flung regions. As exiles settled in Louisiana, Quebec, and other distant territories, They carried with them more than memories and belongings. They preserved a subtle network of knowledge. Oral traditions, coded stories, and ceremonial practices were quietly maintained, often disguised within everyday life. Rituals and songs, once performed in the communal spaces of Acadian villages, became private acts of remembrance in new environments. Children were taught tales imbued with allegorical meaning, ensuring that the lessons, genealogies, and symbols of the past survived in forms that were difficult for outsiders to detect. These cultural codes functioned like a living archive, resilient to persecution and time, a quiet rebellion against erasure. Conflicts and wars in the New World added additional layers of complexity. Settlers faced not only colonial authorities, but also rival populations, harsh environments, and economic instability. Each challenge demanded adaptability, often forcing families to conceal their identities or merge with other communities while retaining secret markers of their ancestry. Through this adaptive secrecy, they managed to protect what was most valuable: the continuity of a hidden line of influence, a bloodline whose significance transcended geography and time. The pressures of survival became intertwined with the preservation of heritage, creating a tapestry of resilience where identity, myth, and memory were inseparable. This pattern of endurance reveals a remarkable aspect of human ingenuity. Even under the threat of annihilation, traditions and secrets can persist when embedded in social structures, oral histories, and cultural practices. The trials faced by Acadian communities mirror the broader story of the Merovingian line itself. Once politically dethroned and historically marginalized, it survived through adaptation, secrecy, and strategic concealment. Every hardship, from forced migration to warfare, became both a threat and an opportunity. A threat to expose or erase the lineage, and an opportunity to protect it in new, inventive ways. By examining these trials, a broader picture emerges, suggesting that history is not solely shaped by visible victories or losses, but also by the quiet persistence of knowledge and identity. The struggles endured by these communities were not random misfortunes. They were crucibles in which secrecy, resilience, and continuity were forged. It is here, in the intersection of survival and hidden purpose, that the Merovingian legacy in North America finds its most compelling expression. These hidden lines of power persisted not through overt domination, but through the careful, deliberate maintenance of memory, ritual, and culture, a testament to the enduring capacity of human lineage to survive, adapt, and influence across generations. Even as centuries have passed, the influence of hidden bloodlines and the legacy of the Merovingians may not have vanished entirely. Modern traces of this ancient lineage can be found in unexpected places, often obscured by time, obscurity, or deliberate secrecy. In communities with Acadian roots, descendants may still carry subtle markers of their ancestry, visible in family names, traditions, and even certain social or political patterns. Unlike the grand, overt power of a royal dynasty, this influence operates quietly, woven into the fabric of everyday life, often invisible to the untrained, yet persistent enough to shape cultural and social dynamics across generations. Genealogical research reveals tantalizing connections, with certain families able to trace lineages back to Europe with surprising continuity, despite the disruptions of exile, war, and migration. These lineages suggest not only survival, but a conscious effort to maintain awareness of ancestry and heritage. Family stories, heirlooms, and private rituals continue to echo elements of Merovingian symbolism, creating a bridge between the distant past and the modern present. In some instances, specific locations, estates, or sacred sites retain historical significance, visited or protected by descendants who understand their ancestral importance, even if the wider world remains unaware of the legacy they safeguard. Modern scholars and amateur historians have begun to notice patterns that suggest the survival of hidden influence beyond the purely genealogical. Certain societal structures, local leadership traditions, and even aspects of religious or cultural practice hint at continuity that defies casual historical explanation. It is as if the descendants of these hidden lines were deliberately shaping communities in subtle ways, ensuring that knowledge, influence, and cultural identity persisted, not through overt rule, but through social and cultural integration. These traces may appear insignificant individually, but together they form a network of influence that quietly echoes the power of an ancient dynasty. Even beyond Acadian and Louisiana communities, the possibility of dispersed Merovingian descendants influencing wider spheres cannot be dismissed. Some theorists suggest that these hidden lines of power may manifest in contemporary networks, familial, social, or even political, that subtly guide decisions, preserve knowledge, or maintain traditions unknown to the mainstream. While evidence is often circumstantial, the patterns are intriguing enough to suggest that the story of the Merovingians is far from concluded. Across continents, the threads of blood, culture, and secret knowledge appear to intertwine in ways that hint at a persistent, underlying influence. Modern interest in these hidden lines has also sparked renewed investigation into symbols, manuscripts, and cultural rituals. Researchers continue to examine European archives, North American historical societies, and private collections for clues that could shed light on the survival of this enigmatic legacy. Digital databases, genealogical tools, and interdisciplinary approaches have opened new avenues for exploring connections that were once invisible. The more one investigates, the more it becomes apparent that history, memory, and identity are interwoven in ways that challenge conventional narratives, suggesting that power and knowledge may endure quietly, even when the world believes it has been lost. In this way, the legacy of the Merovingians remains a living, breathing mystery, subtly shaping the present while echoing the past. Modern traces of this hidden bloodline invite both curiosity and caution, as the interplay between discovery and secrecy continues to define their story. Every ritual preserved, every artifact safeguarded, and every lineage remembered is a testament to resilience. A reminder that true influence often operates in the shadows, enduring long after visible power has faded. For those attuned to these signals, the hidden lines of power offer not only historical intrigue, but a profound meditation on the persistence of legacy, the quiet shaping of communities, and the invisible threads that link past, present, and future. The threads of history, legend, and hidden power converge in a climactic revelation that challenges the boundaries of what we consider reality. Across centuries, from the gilded halls of Merovingian kings to the windswept settlements of Acadia, a pattern emerges, one that suggests the persistence of influence, secrecy, and knowledge that transcends time and geography. This is not merely a story of lost dynasties or forgotten exiles. It is the story of a hidden network, carefully maintained, subtly guiding events and shaping outcomes in ways that remain largely invisible to the casual observer. What once may have seemed coincidental now takes on a sense of deliberate orchestration, as if the Merovingian legacy has never truly been broken, merely concealed. The evidence, when viewed together, is staggering. European tombs, sacred relics, cryptic manuscripts, and subtle cultural codes form a mosaic that points to a deliberate effort to preserve a line of power. Across the Atlantic, the Acadian diaspora and the settlements in Louisiana acted as living repositories of this legacy, protecting it from the sweep of war, exile, and colonial suppression. Families scattered by displacement carried stories, rituals, and heirlooms imbued with symbolic meaning, ensuring that knowledge could survive even in secrecy. These hidden custodians of the bloodline appear to have operated with an almost preternatural awareness of the dangers around them, embedding continuity in every facet of life from language and folklore to land and lineage. Secret societies and esoteric traditions further amplify this narrative. Knights, scholars, and guardians may have acted as invisible intermediaries, transmitting wisdom and maintaining connections across generations. Their rituals, codes, and symbols, often dismissed as eccentric or ceremonial, now appear as deliberate mechanisms for the preservation of knowledge and influence. Every gesture, every coded artifact, every clandestine gathering becomes a fragment of a larger puzzle. A puzzle whose picture suggests that power is not always overt, but often operates in hidden currents, shaping history quietly yet inexorably. In contemporary terms, the implications are equally compelling. Modern descendants, knowingly or unknowingly, may carry forward not only the blood, but also the latent influence of this line. Certain traditions, leadership roles, and cultural markers suggest that the legacy continues to shape communities, guiding values and decisions in subtle ways. Artifacts preserved in private collections, documents hidden in archives, and oral traditions safeguarded through generations all point toward a living continuity. The influence is not obvious. It is woven into the social, cultural, and even spiritual fabric of communities, manifesting quietly, almost invisibly, yet undeniably present for those attuned to see it. This revelation forces a reconsideration of history itself. It challenges the notion that power is only measured in crowns, armies, or political dominance. Instead, it posits a more intricate conception that true influence may survive most effectively in secrecy, enduring through adaptability, cultural preservation, and subtle guidance rather than through overt conquest. The Merovingian bloodline, once thought to be politically extinguished, demonstrates that legacies of power can persist in shadow, influencing the present in ways that mainstream accounts may never fully capture. The climactic realization is both awe-inspiring and unsettling. The story of the Merovingians, intertwined with the Acadian diaspora, secret societies, and cultural memory, presents a hidden continuum of influence that spans centuries. It invites reflection on the invisible forces that shape communities, traditions, and even world events. For those who trace these patterns, the narrative is a reminder that history is never simply what is written in books or preserved in monuments. It is a living tapestry, maintained by those who understand the value of secrecy, continuity, and preservation. The hidden lines of power, once obscured, now emerge in a breathtaking panorama of survival, cunning, and enduring influence, a legacy that refuses to fade, quietly commanding attention across time and space. As the story of hidden bloodlines, secret migrations, and preserved traditions draws to its quiet but powerful conclusion, one is struck by the profound resilience of history and memory. The Merovingian legacy, often dismissed as the stuff of legend, emerges not as a static relic, confined to the past, but as a living, subtle current threading through centuries and continents. From the gilded halls of medieval Europe, where kings ruled under the belief that their blood was sacred, to the windswept villages of Acadia, and then onward to the bayous and fertile landscapes of Louisiana, the line of power has endured. Its survival is remarkable not through the outward displays of force or conquest, but through resilience, secrecy, and the careful preservation of knowledge in forms that defy the conventional historian's tools. It is a reminder that history is infinitely layered. What is recorded is only a fraction of the story, while what is maintained in shadow often carries the deepest truths. In contemplating this hidden continuum, one cannot help but reconsider the nature of influence itself. True power, it seems, rarely announces itself with fanfare. It survives quietly, maintained by those who understand its fragility and the necessity of discretion. The descendants of the Merovingians, intentionally or otherwise, have operated within this principle. Their influence is subtle, woven into language, rituals, oral traditions, and family practices that carry encoded lessons from centuries past. It may be invisible to the casual observer, yet it has shaped communities, cultures, and identities over generations. Every song sung around a hearth, every family tale recounted to children, and every ritual performed with reverence serves as a vessel for this enduring legacy. Even simple acts of daily life can carry the weight of history when understood in context, revealing the invisible threads that bind past and present. The endurance of this bloodline and its cultural echoes underscores the extraordinary ingenuity of human societies in preserving what they value most. Exile, war, and persecution repeatedly threatened to erase the memory of these communities, yet they found ways to survive, adapt, and maintain continuity. The Acadian expulsions, in particular, demonstrate this resilience. Families scattered across North America were forced to rebuild in foreign landscapes, navigating new political realities, hostile environments, and social upheavals. Yet, within these hardships, the mechanisms for preserving cultural memory and hidden knowledge persisted. Language, naming patterns, and oral tradition became tools of both survival and secrecy, ensuring that the lessons, lineage, and symbols of the past endured even when the world sought to forget them. Every migration, every relocation, every forced adaptation acted simultaneously as a challenge and a safeguard. In Louisiana, for instance, Acadian exiles interwove their traditions with local customs and indigenous influences, creating a unique cultural tapestry that preserved elements of the Merovingian legacy. Folktales, celebrations, culinary traditions, and even place names often contain echoes of hidden meaning, signaling connections that outsiders might overlook. Ritualized behaviors, such as seasonal festivals or rites of passage, may appear ordinary on the surface, but function as coded acts of memory preservation. These practices served a dual purpose: to maintain communal cohesion and to act as quiet carriers of ancestral knowledge. Over time, such cultural encoding became an invisible network, a living archive capable of surviving centuries and multiple continents. One of the most striking aspects of this enduring legacy is its subtle integration into the social fabric. Unlike the overt displays of royal power that characterized European monarchies, the influence of these hidden bloodlines often manifests in the invisible shaping of community norms, decision-making processes, and leadership structures. Families and communities, aware of their ancestral history, whether consciously or intuitively, maintain continuity in values, hierarchies, and spiritual practices. The echoes of Merovingian symbolism can be found in the careful preservation of sacred spaces, in architectural choices that reflect ancient alignments or geometric patterns, and in linguistic nuances that have survived the erosion of time. These traces suggest a deliberate and ongoing effort to protect a lineage of knowledge, a quiet orchestration of continuity that transcends generations. The interplay between secrecy and survival also illuminates the philosophical dimensions of history. It suggests that the forces shaping the world are not always visible or immediately understood. Influence is not merely a function of power, conquest, or material wealth. It often operates in subtle, almost imperceptible ways, transmitted through culture, family, and memory. The Merovingian line, both in Europe and in North America, demonstrates that true endurance relies on adaptability, discretion, and the skillful embedding of knowledge in forms that withstand the ravages of time. This observation challenges conventional historical narratives, prompting reflection on what might have been deliberately hidden, what survived despite suppression, and how much of the past remains encoded in the present in ways we are only beginning to recognize. Modern traces of this hidden lineage further underscore its persistence. Genealogical research continues to uncover families whose bloodlines can be traced with remarkable continuity, surviving centuries of disruption. Some of these families retain knowledge, rituals, or heirlooms that link them directly to the distant past. Others may carry the legacy unknowingly, their behaviors, beliefs, and social patterns subtly shaped by ancestral memory. This duality, the coexistence of conscious preservation and unconscious inheritance, adds depth to the narrative, suggesting that influence can operate on multiple levels simultaneously. It is both tangible and intangible, social and spiritual, visible and hidden. Each generation becomes a link in a chain, a custodian of a legacy that continues to exert influence quietly yet profoundly. The endurance of these hidden lines of power also offers a reflection on human ingenuity in the face of adversity. Communities and families that have faced centuries of exile, persecution, and upheaval demonstrate remarkable resourcefulness in protecting what they consider essential. Through oral traditions, coded rituals, linguistic patterns, and selective secrecy, they have safeguarded knowledge that might have been irretrievably lost. These mechanisms, while subtle, reveal a sophisticated understanding of preservation, a recognition that the survival of identity, culture, and power often depends on restraint, adaptability, and a keen awareness of when to reveal and when to conceal. In this sense, the hidden Merovingian legacy exemplifies a broader principle applicable to human history itself, that survival and influence often operate most effectively in the shadows. Beyond the historical and genealogical dimensions, this legacy carries profound philosophical and cultural implications. It invites contemplation about the forces that shape societies, the invisible currents that guide human behavior, and the ways in which memory and identity persist across generations. By examining hidden lines of power, one gains insight not only into the Merovingian bloodline, but also into the broader dynamics of secrecy, resilience, and continuity that define human civilization. It becomes clear that history is not merely a series of dates and events, but a complex, living tapestry woven from both visible and invisible threads. Knowledge, influence, and power often reside in subtle, quiet places, guiding outcomes while eluding overt observation. The story also encourages reflection on the relationship between past and present. Every ritual maintained, every story preserved, and every symbol passed down across centuries is a testament to human capacity for resilience and foresight. The hidden lines of power exemplify how legacies can endure even when threatened by the passage of time, political upheaval, or deliberate suppression. They remind us that history is not static. It is dynamic, layered, and often deliberately obscured, waiting for the careful observer to discern the patterns and connections that underlie apparent chaos. In this light, the Merovingian bloodline is not merely a historical curiosity, but a lens through which we can better understand the mechanisms by which culture, identity, and influence persist. Finally, the narrative leaves us with a lingering sense of awe and reflection. The hidden lines of power, woven across centuries and continents, challenge assumptions about what is truly lost and what endures. They remind us that history is rarely straightforward, and that the forces shaping our world often operate beneath the surface. From Europe to North America, from kings and exiles to modern descendants, this story demonstrates the resilience of human ingenuity, the persistence of memory, and the enduring impact of heritage. The Merovingian legacy, though concealed and enigmatic, continues to resonate, whispering through the corridors of time, culture, and identity. As we contemplate this legacy, it becomes evident that true understanding requires more than observation. It demands attention, reflection, and a willingness to look beyond the obvious. Hidden power, subtle influence, and enduring tradition are not always apparent, but they shape lives and communities in ways both profound and enduring. The Merovingian bloodline, surviving through secrecy, adaptation, and cultural preservation, offers a vivid example of this principle. Its story challenges us to consider what else might lie concealed in the folds of history, waiting for those perceptive enough to notice, patient enough to seek, and wise enough to understand. In this sense, the legacy is not merely a conclusion. It is an invitation, a call to look deeper, listen closer, and recognize the enduring currents of influence that continue to ripple quietly through the present, shaping the world in ways we may only just begin to perceive. Even as the story of the Merovingians, the Acadian mystery, and the hidden lines of power comes to what feels like a natural conclusion, the narrative is far from finished. History, after all, is not static. It flows, bends, and sometimes conceals as much as it reveals. Section 17 serves as a quiet epilogue, a reflective lens, an invitation to wonder, and a bridge from the past into our contemporary world. It asks a simple yet profound question. If these currents of hidden influence have persisted for over a millennium, shaping the course of communities and civilizations in ways largely invisible, what other forces lie quietly beneath the surface of our own present day? The Merovingians and their descendants remind us that history often moves in shadows. The artifacts we uncover, the documents we study, and the stories we hear are merely glimpses of a larger, more intricate design. Some threads have been preserved intentionally, others by chance, but all contribute to a tapestry that refuses to be fully unraveled. In North America, descendants may live ordinary lives, unaware of the legacy flowing in their veins. Across Europe, cryptic symbols, hidden tombs, and forgotten manuscripts continue to hint at a narrative larger than what textbooks allow. These are not idle curiosities. They are whispers of the past, echoing into the present, waiting for the perceptive, the patient, and the imaginative to listen. Modern technology, archival research, and genealogical tools have opened doors that were once impossible to access. DNA studies, digital repositories, and interdisciplinary scholarship are allowing us to trace connections that might once have remained invisible forever. The pattern becomes clearer. Influence, legacy, and heritage persist in forms both tangible and intangible. Even today, social networks, cultural traditions, and family structures may carry echoes of these hidden lineages. Whether through subtle leadership patterns, ritualized behavior, or symbolic observances, the past continues to shape the present. Section 17 invites viewers to consider that every community, every tradition, and even every personal story might conceal fragments of larger histories waiting to be revealed. This final reflection also encourages a philosophical meditation on secrecy, memory, and human resilience. The Merovingian legacy is an illustration of the profound human instinct to protect, preserve, and transmit what is most valued. Even under duress, through war, exile, or political erasure, knowledge can endure. Stories, rituals, and cultural codes serve as both shield and vessel, maintaining continuity across generations. This is a reminder that influence is not always measured in wealth, armies, or political power. It may survive most effectively in quiet persistence, in subtle acts of remembrance, and in the careful safeguarding of memory. Moreover, the narrative invites an intimate, personal reflection. What does it mean to be a part of history that is hidden, secret, or intentionally obscured? How do we reconcile the stories we inherit with the reality we see? By contemplating the Merovingian legacy, viewers are encouraged to consider the invisible threads in their own lives, lines of influence, cultural inheritance, or family memory that shape identity in ways often overlooked. In this sense, Section 17 transforms the documentary from a tale of distant history into a mirror reflecting the ongoing resonance of legacy and the quiet persistence of influence. Finally, this epilogue leaves viewers with a sense of wonder rather than closure. The Merovingians, the Acadians, and the hidden lines of power are not confined to the past. They ripple into the present and perhaps into the future. Each uncovered artifact, each whispered story, each preserved ritual is an invitation to continue the journey of discovery. History, after all, is never truly finished. It waits in shadows, in archives, and in the veins of descendants, offering endless possibilities for revelation. Section 17 closes not with answers, but with questions, encouraging viewers to remain curious, attentive, and open to the hidden currents of the world around them. In this lingering tension between the known and the unknown, the seen and the concealed, the audience is left with the true essence of the story. That legacy endures, secrets persist, and the lines of power are never truly lost. They are merely waiting for the next generation to recognize, interpret, and carry them forward. In this sense, the documentary does not end, but opens a door. It invites viewers to look deeper, to question what is hidden, and to appreciate that history's most enduring truths may always exist just beyond the surface, quietly shaping the present while whispering promises of revelations yet to come. The story of the Merovingians and the Acadian mystery is thus both a history and a living challenge, a reminder that some of the world's most powerful currents are invisible, silent, and eternal, waiting for those who are willing to follow the trail.